Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, right now, the supply chain seems to be greatly affecting both businesses and consumers all over the world. But this got me thinking, what are some of the challenges that the trucking and logistics companies are experiencing right now? And how is technology helping? And what are the biggest tech challenges for the transportation industry right now? And how do we work around it? And how will technology impact the trucking and logistics industry in the future? All these things are the kind of things that run through my head when I watch the news. But rather than shake my head in disbelief and shout at the TV screen, "That's it, Christmas is ruined," I try to get someone on a call who's working right in the heart of it all and try and obtain a better understanding of the situation and learn how technology can improve that industry. So today I've invited Wendy Greenland, CEO of Openforce, onto the podcast today. And Openforce is a provider of technology-driven and insuretech solutions for transportation companies, but I don't want to reveal too much yet. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Phoenix, Arizona, where Wendy is waiting to speak with me now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Neil. It's very nice to be on the show today. My name is Wendy Greenland. I'm the CEO of Openforce. Openforce is a 1099 solutions company. So that's for the independent contractor model in the United States. And we work primarily with contracting companies that work with 1099 workforces every single day. Our technology facilitates the relationship between the contracting company and the independent contractor. So I come from a long history in technology. I started in telecommunications with Sprint earlier in my career. I owned a business, a wireless telecommunications business for 12 years. And then I moved into software in 2013-14 timeframe. I was in the HRIS and payroll space for a long time. And then in 2019, I moved over to Openforce. Openforce is very similar in its conception to an HRIS and payroll platform technology, but it is to facilitate the relationship between a vendor and a company instead of a W-2 employee and a company. And so Openforce is designed from the get-go to facilitate that vendor relationship and to really prevent the risk of something called misclassification, where somebody's misclassified as a 1099 and should have been classified as a W-2 employee. So that's a little bit about who I am and what we do.
Fantastic. And like you said, you've had a long career and long history in technology, but I want to take you back even further. I mean, can you share your origin story and where your passion for technology came from and ultimately what put you on that path that ended up putting on where you are today?
That's a great question. I started as a technical trainer.
Yeah.
And I actually had a passion for training people in large organizations. And so I started as a technical trainer with Sprint. I had a very, very early job right out of college with a management company, but then I was able to move over to Sprint as a technical trainer. I really enjoyed technical training. I enjoyed digging into the technology. This was way back when it was CDMA technology in the 90s. And digging in and understanding where the industry was going when it came to wireless telecommunications. And I enjoyed teaching people, helping them learn. And I grew into management. Management became a passion for me within a technology company. So I became a training manager at Sprint. And then I moved to a small rural community where training managers were just not necessary. And my ex-husband at the time was an engineer from Intel. And so we bought a small wireless, just a DSL provider, a wireless community internet access. And we started that in 2001 timeframe. And we did that for about 12 years. And we grew it into a wireless telecommunications company that worked primarily with the FCC through their E-rate program, their Universal Services Fund. And we provided wireless telecommunications to hospitals, schools, and libraries. And so those that are in poverty-stricken areas, they get subsidies for that technology. So we were able to get them larger bandwidth for the price that sometimes those urban areas can afford, that those rural community schools and libraries can't afford. So we kind of grew a niche in a very small Four Corners community up in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah border. And we did a lot of E-rate work and telecommunication, wireless telecommunications provisions for those small community schools. I really enjoyed that for a long time, and that company is still going, SCS Connect. But at the time, my husband and I were getting divorced. I decided to make a move over to Phoenix, and I changed careers at that point, and I moved into software.
Wow. And that path ended up with you arriving at Openforce. And we will have a lot of people listening all over the world that are hearing about Openforce for the very first time. So for those people that aren't familiar with your company, can you tell me a little bit more about it and the kind of problems that you're solving for businesses and what makes you different from other solutions out there?
If you think about an HRIS, just that HR platform, that technology that facilitates the relationship between a company and a W-2 employee, what we do is something similar, only it's the opposite, because what we're doing is we're facilitating the relationship between a company and a 1099 vendor. So our technology is built to create the relationship, the vendor relationship for a 1099. And while it's similar to an HRIS platform, it facilitates a relationship that prevents the risk of misclassification. So if you were to use an HRIS platform that you would use for a W-2 employee, think ADP or Paychex or any of those HRIS and payroll platforms, then what you're doing is you're facilitating a relationship between a company and a W-2 employee. Well, when you're using a 1099, they're truly a vendor. They should be paid out of accounts payables. And unfortunately, many companies here in the US do this wrong. They will get into a situation where they want to use a 1099 because maybe the work is short term, it's a project-oriented work. Or in the case of transportation, I have goods to deliver this week, but I don't have goods to deliver next week. So a 1099 relationship makes sense because they may be on or off dispatch depending on the work that needs to be done. And so when you have a vendor relationship like that with a 1099, if you treat them like an employee, even if you call them a 1099, but if you treat them like a W-2 employee and you keep them housed in a W-2 relationship in that technology, then when you get before a judge and they say, hey, this should have been a W-2, you can say it should have been a 1099 contract worker. But when they see all of the evidence in your technology is facilitated through a W-2 HRIS and payroll platform, then they're going to say, hey, you might say that it's a 1099, but I'm telling you it's a W-2, and that person's been misclassified. Now, what happens from there is once they're misclassified, then usually an auditor will come in, the IRS will come in, you'll have all sorts of state, federal, and local agencies that'll come in and audit you, and they'll look for all of your 1099, and they're going to go ahead and charge those payroll taxes, and they'll make them retroactive to the beginning of the contract. And so, a few $1,000s can turn into hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars because they misclassified somebody, and then their entire workforce may then become misclassified because they did an audit and looped them all in. So it's critically important for companies to do this right and to make sure that with a lot of the legislation going on right now, that they understand how to do this successfully, and that they are operationalizing the minimization of risk by making sure that every step in the process, every part of the life cycle of working with a 1099 looks and feels like a 1099 vendor relationship. Technology is one of the best ways to facilitate that relationship successfully, because technology can log and keep documents and have a vault, and all of the pieces and parts of that relationship can be housed in the technology. It can actually prove out that the relationship truly is a vendor relationship. It's one of the only ways to really do this kind of relationship successfully, in my opinion.
And as we record this podcast today, we're 5,000 miles apart, but we've both seen and being impacted by the supply chain issues going on around the world at the moment. And I think before the last few weeks, many of us kind of took it for granted and the supply chain is greatly affecting both businesses and consumers. But what are some of the biggest challenges that the trucking and logistics companies are experiencing, and how is your technology essentially helping in all this?
So with the driver shortages, we really believe that a lot of what's going on in the supply chain, I mean, there's a number of things going on, but
Yeah.
the driver shortages in the US is definitely one of the things that we're struggling with the most. They're estimating over 100,000 drivers short coming into peak season this year, which means, Neil, if you haven't gotten your Christmas packages being delivered now, you're probably already running late on it, because anybody that waits last minute this year is probably going to have trouble getting those packages delivered on time. We started peak season back in that August, September timeframe, when normally this is the time of year when things begin to ramp up. So the driver shortage is one of the key areas that we're seeing that are affecting us here in the United States. And the technology, in my opinion, can help facilitate, because what we do is we use the technology to go out to the drivers that have worked with us in the past, for example, through our IC Recruit platform. And we say, hey, there's drivers needed in your area. And we can use technology to gather their information and post that to all of our clients and say, hey, these drivers are available. They have these types of vehicles. They have these types of credentials. They have this compliance. They have these insurances, and they're ready to work in your area. And so, you can begin to connect the driver with the work or that third party logistics company that's looking for the work. And technology can facilitate those relationships. The other thing that it can do that is just beginning to really emerge in our industry is really begin to tackle the insurance issue. One of the large issues, the two largest issues with getting somebody on the road quickly, is compliance and insurance. So let's say you have somebody who wants to become a courier driver, or they want to become a last mile driver and deliver that refrigerator to their home, for example. Well, they're going to have a background check, a drug screen, an MVR, that motor vehicle record. They're going to have the proper insurances. They need to have an occupational accident. What if they drop that refrigerator on their foot, for example, right? They have to have an insurance coverage for accidents, but then also cargo insurance and general liability insurance. And if they're on dispatch and maybe using their own personal vehicle, their personal vehicle insurance is not going to cover. They need some sort of while under dispatch insurance coverage. So what we do is we gather through our IC Insure product, we gather these coverages and these product lines from the different brokers that work with this population. And we offer those insurances up through the workflow. So that's really where I think technology becomes just that insuretech technology can become really beneficial, because you can offer up options to a 1099 that is really a small business in their own right, and give them choices for the insurances that they need in order to meet the requirements of the contract. So we can facilitate that, so that the contracting company doesn't have to facilitate that. The moment the contracting company says, hey, you need to have these insurances, they start to get in trouble for misclassification. But if we do it and we offer it up through the technology and give them options, now you're supporting the model, right? They have options, they can pick and choose their insurances, but they're meeting the requirements of the contract without that contracting company telling them what to do. The other thing is that they end up with multiple revenue streams. By offering themselves up through our IC Recruit portal, they can gather multiple revenue streams, which proves out the model. Now they really are a small business. They're working for multiple businesses. They have their insurance items, they have their compliance items, and they're a small business saying, hey, I'm available. They're hanging up their shingle, so to speak, and they're able to run routes for more than one organization. And that proves out the model in multiple ways. Technology facilitates that relationship. Without technology, it would be almost impossible to prove out that those things are going on when you're in court. Technology allows you to create those logs. You take those logs and you can present them to say, this is the relationship that was created between the contracting company and the contractor. And here are the insurances, here are the options, here are the choices that they made. Technology facilitates all of those things.
Love that. And that's one of the many reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today, to get some of these insights and share them with people around the world. And as someone working right in the heart of the industry, can you also expand on why insurance and compliance technology is also incredibly important for contractor workforces right now?
So, if you're a potential driver and you want to get into the business and you want to deliver, let's say, a last mile. So a last mile is somebody who's delivering on vehicles that are over 10,000 pounds, but under 26,000 pounds. They're not the over the road trucker, but they're that big box truck, big and bulky items. And they're delivering those refrigerators, washers, dryers, but they're going into the home. So when you look at compliance, you need somebody who has had a background check and a drug screen. You don't want someone going in the home that doesn't have that background check and that doesn't have a drug screen, for example. You want to make sure they have insurances to cover them in case they nick your floor or run that refrigerator, or as they're hooking it up, they nick a hose and now your entire kitchen is flooded. All of those pieces of last mile and assembly are really a great example of why compliance items are so important. And if the homeowner finds that there's any issue with that, they're going to go back to the third party logistics company that contracted with that contractor and say, hey, they did X, Y, or Z. The contract, it's the onus is then on them to say, we have a clean background check. We have a clean drug test. They showed that they had all of the insurances that they need. Technology can show all of that without the contracting company forcing it. Once they force it, now you're in trouble with misclassification. But without compliance items in place, then you've got people going into the homes and you don't know what's happening, and you don't know what kind, if their background check isn't clean. Those are the concerns. There was a case in Florida where somebody had a subcontractor with them. It wasn't one of ours on our platform, but there was an incident where he shot the homeowner. And so, everybody now is looking to compliance to say, well, did this person have a background check? Did they have a drug screen? Did they have the insurances? Who's going to do what? And so without the visibility into all of those compliance items, now you've got contractor, you've got the contracting company, and you've got the homeowner, and everybody's looking to say, well, who was this person and why were they in my home? If you didn't know, compliance is critical to getting people on the road and getting them on the road successfully, making sure the right people are on the road, delivering the right goods and services. So I believe compliance is a huge part of this, along with insurance. And I think technology facilitates those and allows us to see the most up-to-date compliance items through the platform that we offer, and gives visibility to the contracting company without them having control over it, which would get them in trouble for misclassification. It's kind of circular, as you can see. If they tell them what to do, they get in trouble for misclassification. But if they don't have all of those things in place, then they may get in trouble down the road because of a compliance issue or an insurance issue.
And it really feels like transportation is in the news all the time at the moment. Yes, we have the supply chain issues, but there's also a lot of opportunities around electronic vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and lowering carbon footprints, etc. But I'm curious, what do you think is the single biggest technology challenge for the transportation industry right now, and how do we work around it from everything that you're seeing and experiencing out there?
There's a lot of emerging technology coming out. I think one of the things that we're seeing in terms of the struggles that we're having is that the legislation is beginning to really tighten down on these contracting companies, giving them more and more requirements for these drivers. So what we're seeing is that the drivers are getting more and more barriers to entry, for example, to get on the road. And so if you have a driver that wants to go out and deliver, going back to the refrigerator example, they want to deliver refrigerators, but now that contracting company is very nervous about misclassification and legislation, and maybe they're concerned about having a target on their back. So what they're doing is they're making it more difficult for that driver to get on the road. So they're saying, okay, so now we want you to have over the road truckers require a Department of Transportation number and an MC number, all the motor carrier authorities. are regulated, and they require commercial auto, and they require all of these pieces for an over the road. Well, they're starting to push that down into the courier and last mile space. So you might have a courier that's only making, $500-800 a week, that now you're requiring they get an LLC, they get an MC number, they get a DOT number. Now all these things are huge costs, right? Yeah. That they get commercial auto. And so you're creating more and more moats, you're creating more and more barriers for these drivers to get on the road, because you want to prevent the risk of misclassification. So instead of them saying, here's how to facilitate this relationship successfully, we can build technology, Neil, to facilitate it successfully. But every state right now in the United States is tackling this differently. And you have federal agents, local agents, state agents, you've got the IRS, you've got all of these different state, federal, and local agencies that are coming in and saying, hey, we think they're not 1099 for this reason, or we think they are 1099. They all have different economic reality tests that they're measuring the independent contractor relationship. So what's the multi-factor test of the state? What's the multi-factor test of the state, federal, local agency? They're all different. And so the contracting companies are getting more and more afraid of getting a misclassification claim lawsuit. And those are the kinds of things that are causing them to get more and more litigious. And as a result of that, it's getting more and more difficult to become a driver. And then on the other side of that, because of the pandemic, a lot of our older drivers and many of our over the road and last mile drivers were older. They were in their 60s and 70s, and they're beginning to age out. They're saying, look, you want me to do all of that now? I'm done. I'm just gonna retire, and I'm not gonna do this anymore. And then you have this younger generation of people that want to deliver, right? They're coming out, they love this gig economy, they love that freelance concept. I'm gonna make a little money here and a little money here and a little money here. So they're doing Instacart, and they're doing DoorDash, and they're doing they're delivering for Grubhub, and all of these different easy, quick gig kind of work. Well, that's your new generation of drivers, but they don't want to go through all of the work of getting an LLC and an MC number and a DOT number. And they don't really understand that there's a lot more money to be made there. There's a lot of higher earning potential there, but they like the quick and easy. And unfortunately, they're not getting the insurances often that they need. They're not getting the compliance items often that they need. And they definitely aren't getting that commercial auto that they need. So we're going to see more and more accidents. We're going to see more and more claims. And the moment somebody gets hurt delivering for Instacart, for example, if they fall at a grocery store and break a leg, what's going to happen is that they're going to go after the work comp of the company they're delivering for. And they're going to say, hey, you're 1099. You should have handled that on your own. So now they have no choice but to have someone pay for it. So then that's what we call a work comp heat-seeking missile, and they actually, file a claim and say, hey, you should have given me benefits. I should have been an employee, and now you're in a misclassification lawsuit. So those are the kinds of things that I think are going to drive the industry. I think technology is the way to solve it through the kind of relationship and ecosystem that we have. But you're going to see more and more of this because of the new generation and the gig economy coming down the wire.
And we are racing towards the end of 2021 now. And I think everybody's starting to have an eye on the following year, 2022, a new year of opportunities, how businesses can bounce back, etc. And how we can bounce back as individuals and do things differently. But how do you think technology will impact the trucking and logistics industry in the not too distant future? Is there anything that I'm going to ask you to look in your virtual crystal ball, I know, but is there anything that you can see happening?
Yeah, so I believe that the driver shortage is here to stay for a while. I don't think that's going to go away. So we have a lot of work to do to get a new generation of drivers. I think the onus is on us to really begin to attract, recruit, and help new drivers understand what it means to be a courier, last mile, over the road trucker, and or drayage, the at the ports, all of the different ways that they can help distribute and move goods throughout the country. I think that's here to stay, and we have to figure that out. I think insurances are going to continue to be a big factor in 2022. We have a lot of insuretech platforms that are coming out. I do believe the pandemic has been a tailwind for insurance companies to realize that they need to think differently about their way they're covering drivers, and they're beginning now to use technology for rating tools for on and off dispatch products. And they are starting to see the light around how technology through insuretech technology can really begin to facilitate the insurances needed for this population of people, both over the road and last mile, and certainly courier and gig. They're starting to see the light around technology and how insuretech platforms can begin to really move them through quickly and get them on the road faster. So I think we're going to start to see a lot more movement around insurance companies being more creative, using technology, insuretech platforms to provide more and more interesting products for insurances for this population of people. So that's definitely on the horizon.
Love that. And I love chatting with you today. And we've almost come full circle now. We began the podcast talking about your origin story, and it's time to have a little bit of fun with you and ask you, what was the soundtrack to your origin story? Is there a song or piece of music that has accompanied you throughout your career, inspired you, or just helps you get your head in the zone? If you've got a song and story you can share with us, we'll add it to our Spotify playlist where every guest leaves a little song behind. Is there anything that springs to mind for you?
So the soundtrack of my career has definitely been classic rock.
Yeah.
I would say if I were to choose a song that I use to get kind of the juices flowing and get me ramped up, would be probably something like Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses.
Oh, what a tune. Yeah, absolutely.
So I love that.
I'm fighting the urge not to say "You Know Where You Are" and screech that down.
That's exactly right.
But I will rein myself in. And for anyone that would love to find out any information about Openforce, anything we've talked about today, or even contact your team, what's the best starting point?
Well, we can be found at oforce.com. And our platform and everything that we do is on there. The IC Recruit platform is on there. So even if you're listening and you're a driver and you'd like to get into our network, you can fill out a form and immediately begin marketing yourself and figuring out the compliance and insurance items you need in order to become a driver. We're constantly looking for new drivers in the space, and oforce.com is the right way to connect with us.
Excellent. Well, I'll add those links to the blog post that will accompany this episode so people can find you nice and easily. So I don't need to be scrambling around looking for a pen if everybody listening is. But thank you so much for coming on here today, talking about how technology will impact the trucking and logistics industry in the future, overcome the challenges now, but more than anything for sharing your story and a great classic rock track too. So thank you so much for sharing that with me today.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks for having me on the show today. I really appreciate being here.
I cannot thank Wendy enough for coming on the podcast today and making so much of what I see on the news a little more clearer, and help me understand how technology is actually transforming the transportation industry right now and some of the changes we can expect to see in the future too. And of course, she also resides in Phoenix, which always has a very special place in my heart after I visited there a few years ago when I was doing some work with the Greater Phoenix Economic Council. And regular listeners will know that Chris Camacho from the GPEC has been on the podcast several times too. So much great tech going on over there. And I want to put where you listen to this podcast on the map too. So wherever you're listening to me, wherever you are in the world, there is a space for you on this podcast to share your story, your insights, your expertise. And if you don't want to do that, just send me a quick email or a DM and we can have a chat offline as well. Whatever works best for you. So you can get me at techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram at Neil C. Hughes. And if you'd like to work with me, if you need help with business blogs or launching your own podcast, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find over 2,000 podcast interviews across this one, Tech Talks Daily, Switched On Thinking with Netgear, and Tech Fusion by Citrix. But I've taken up far too much of your time already, so a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.